Hello, how are you? And we're back now with another conversation here at the Audition Technique. And I'm super excited today to be speaking to Dr. David Roland. David is a personal friend, a neighbour, in fact. But more importantly, David's background, David went through a journey as being a musician and then also being a psychologist. And in terms of psychology, what he studied the kind of the impact of nerves and sort of the tension on a performer. So he's written a book, The Confident Performer. When I say has written a book, it's now out of print. It's kind of, he's written it some time ago. He is an author. He's a PhD. He is a psychologist or psychiatrist, David? What is the correct?
Psychologist.
Psychologist, fantastic. And what instrument, sorry, I didn't ask you, what instrument do you play?
I mainly played guitar. In the early days, it was classical guitar, and then, guitar for singing, but also singing is probably my main instrument now.
Right. So therefore, in terms of nerves and the sort of the impact of your book, The Confident Performer, that would have a big impact in terms of the tightness of the vocal cords.
Yes. Well, for a singer and the same for an actor, your body is your instrument. Mm-hmm. So it needs to be in just the right state of balance for everything to work.
Yeah. So am I right in sort of in surmising that that your book is to improve the confidence of the artist in performance?
Yeah, if I might just give you a bit of the backstory here, Greg.
Oh, please.
I studied as a psychologist and I did general psychology. But when it came time to do my PhD research, I thought, well, my two passions have always been music and performing and psychology. Maybe I can put the two together. And it just so happened that the conservatorium in Wollongong University, where I was studying at that time, they said, we've got a lot of nervous performers. Can you do anything? And that's when I just got one of those epiphanies. I thought, wow, I've got the both sides, so let's put them together. And also, and then later on, I was in Canberra. I was working at the Canberra School of Music, Canberra School of Art, and I got in touch with a sports psychologist at the Australian Institute of Sport, and I discovered that sports psychologists were doing a lot of mental training, which would help athletes. And I thought, wow, no one's doing that in the performance field, so let's translate that into a performance context.
Interesting, because I have said that myself, that in terms of sort of the level of the skill level when it comes to professional sportsmen, that it's kind of, there is very little difference probably in terms of their technique, their skill level. It is their attitude that actually sort of changes things, that impacts on their results. It was interesting, one of the comments you made in the book is that your level of success is likely tied to your confidence as an artist. Tell me something. Is that the kind of the thrust of the kind of, to create a confident performer, to create a successful performer, that it's tied to their confidence?
I think it is tied to your confidence, and it's good to analyze or break down what is confidence. And from a psychologist's point of view, it's multifactorial. So one is the physical aspect of confidence, and we know that the fight-flight response automatically comes into play if we feel or we perceive any kind of threat at all. And the type of threat we're going to experience as a performer is obviously, the audience aren't going to like us, or I'm going to fluff a line, or, I'm not going to get into character, whatever it is. It's not so much a physical threat, but it still turns on that ancient physical threat response that we've always had. So we want to sort of keep that physiological mechanism, going, just bubbling along at the right state. And then from a behavioral point of view, we've got to rehearse. We've got to know our lines. We've got to know our gestures. We've got to know all the actions that we're going to do. And that's what any elite performer of any style needs to do. And then finally, from the psychological point of view, we've got to be talking to ourselves in a way that allows for us to be excited, to be a bit on edge, but not too much over the top. So in the book, I talk quite a bit about the self-talk, the way you talk to yourself.
Interesting. I wanted to sort of touch on that because you made a comment, an interesting comment, that the time that sort of, performers commit to or their preparation, rehearsal, whatever, far outweighs the actual time of performance. And you mentioned just then about sort of, that we learn the gestures. Is it actually better for a person to sort of really lock in the kind of the gestures, lock in each moment, or how much do you leave to that instinctive moment?
I think everybody's going to find just what the right balance is for them. So there's not an exact formula. It's not a science in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But what I would say is that one of the positive sides of performance is that you bring things out of yourself that you wouldn't do in rehearsal, because the performance is different from the rehearsal, and it's certainly different from your own private practice.
Mm-hmm.
So I say, instead of thinking of the performance as anxiety provoking or overwhelming, think of it as a challenge where you encourage the sense of excitement. And we know that when we're excited, we do things spontaneously that we never programmed. So we want to allow for that. And I've got a daughter who works in film and television, and she says on a film shoot, what will happen is that an actor will come out with a line that they'd never rehearsed, but it actually works really well, just because in that moment, something was informing them to do what they did.
In that moment, absolutely. What a great expression. Yeah. Now, there's a couple of things I want to go through with you, because you actually mentioned in your book that actors overestimate their chance of failure, that they overestimate the difficulty of what they're about to tackle. They overestimate also the consequences of failure. If I don't get this part, it'll be, tragic for my career journey. And yet at the same time, what they underestimate is their actual ability. Is that something you discovered, or is that something you went to these students at Wollongong University with, knowing that is what you had to tackle in their perception?
Well, if we're talking about people that are aspiring to be, professional performers, or at least amateur performers that want to take it to a sophisticated level, there's going to be sort of pressures that we can create for ourselves. So I'll just translate that to the sports arena for a moment. If we've got an Olympic athlete, the last thing that they want to be doing as they're preparing for their race on the day and the weeks before, and certainly, when they're at the starting blocks, is to be thinking about getting a gold medal and thinking about what this will mean for their reputation, or thinking about all the people that are, on their shoulders. Because none of that actually helps you do the job at hand, which is to run fast or to jump high. None of that helps you. So what we need to do is shift our focus to the performance cues and the actual actions, the things that we've been training for and rehearsing. So I think what happens is that performers can overestimate their chance of failure if they haven't been rehearsing properly. We all need to rehearse. You can't just turn up and it just works. And then if they've been rehearsing, then they can underestimate their chance of success. Whereas if they've been doing all the right things, they've got every reason to succeed.
It's interesting you say that the kind of the Olympic athlete sort of, envisions the gold medal. In terms of sort of an actor and their kind of journey through the audition process, they always think of booking the job, that you actually go through the audition and book the job. And that is their criteria of success, rather than sort of, to do their best.
Yeah, so I would encourage focusing on doing your best, just getting better and better at what you do, the process of doing what you want to do. And, the outcomes will flow on from that. What you might do is you might think of the outcomes, like where you want to go in your job or in your career, as a motivator. That can help motivate you to get up in the mornings and do what you need to do, or to go to yet another audition. But in the time of the audition, that's the last thing you want to be thinking about, whether you actually get the job. It doesn't help you do the process.
Exactly. I think though, and I mean, I want to sort of now sort of, explore your approach and your thinking in terms of, because you speak of performance and that the performance is the thing. But of course, here at the audition technique, what we talk about is the audition. And an interesting comment was that sort of performers perceive that the audience is, unfriendly or hostile. And that's, or even a threat. And that is absolutely the case in an audition, because the audience is your judge and jury. Do you
Yeah.
perceive, is there a different perception or a different thinking or a different approach that an actor or a performer should take with an audition?
Good question. What I found when so one of the studies I did from my PhD was to interview top flight performers. So these were international stars and national stars, and I guess every one of them hated the audition process. It's actually the worst part
Of course.
because you don't have a real audience. You know, they haven't turned up there just to enjoy your performance, and the audition panel are going to be much more critical,
Yeah.
and they've got another agenda in mind besides whether you're doing a nice performance. So that the audition process really is the toughest part, I think, of being a performer. No doubt about it. And now I've forgotten your question. What was that, Greg?
It was more so the fact of sort of, would there be different techniques or a different sort of, mindset that needs to be employed for approaching an audition where where it is truly a hostile audience?
Okay, I think I can offer something there. With the work that I did, I would often get medical specialists who have to do vivas, where they have to examine a patient cold, like the patient's not cold, but they go into the room and they're cold. They've never seen this person before, and this person has got something wrong with them, some illness, and they have to diagnose it and say what treatment there would be. But they've got an audition panel, so to speak. They've got these other specialists standing around while they're, diagnosing this patient. And I would get several of these very capable young doctors fail that viva because they would just lose their knowledge, so to speak, in front of the audition panel. So what I did with them that was very successful was I would do a relaxation process so that they would get in a relaxed state, and that was in my office. And then I would ask them to do a mental rehearsal. So imagine the scene or the scene that might happen, and imagine the panel being there, imagine the patient, and imagine them handling that whole process, even if they make a little mistake, how they recover. Because we always do make a mistake in the performance. So it's how we recover, and how we not show that we know that we've made a mistake to the observers. So that mental rehearsal process can either be done as if you're watching it on a screen, like you're watching a movie, or it can be from inside out. So you're actually going through the process, imagining what it would be like from, looking out through your eyes. And athletes do the same thing. So before an event, a downhill skier will see the slope and all the bends that they need to take and the turns, and they will rehearse mentally that over and over and imagine themselves going down. So I would encourage more of that mental rehearsal in an audition process.
And when you say that mental rehearsal, let me paraphrase what, just to sort of check that I've got it right. It's that fact of it's not just getting the performance right, but it's actually tackling the mental image of that experience in the room, that experience in the audition.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's tackling me in that situation. So I want to be as much of me in the way I want me to be in that context. And so what we can do, that's not about the skills, that's about how you are in that context.
Interesting. I always say to actors, or one of the things I like to sort of empower them with is, because there's a sort of a standard cliche is dance like no one is watching. And I then add to that, and now audition like you already have the part.
Sorry, I just got distracted by somebody walking past. Sorry, what was that?
There is a cliche that says, dance like no one is watching, because you dance with a freedom. And I've added to that for our members here at the Audition Technique, dance like no one is watching, but audition like you already have the part.
Right, okay. So what's the question? Do you want me to comment on that?
Oh, no, just to the fact that sort of an audition, which is separate to a performance,
yes,
that approach, the performer's approach to it is different, and you should audition like you are actually doing the performance, as if you have the part, as if you...
Yes. Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm.
So you sort of really inhabit that role, and this is me. I'm this character, and you know, what we need to realize, there's a lot of things that are outside of our control. So I might do a splendid performance, and I couldn't have done any better, but they don't choose me because they've got some other agenda that's not about me being a successful performer.
True.
And so that's why after the audition process, how we evaluate ourselves, the self-talk we use, is critical because it sets us up for the next audition. So if I can truly say I did my best performance, you know, with the time I had and the situation, and you know, they didn't choose me because they had this or that agenda in mind, and it just didn't fit with that agenda. Well, I've been successful.
Yep. I have one last question for you, or one last kind of, you know, experience that actors have in the audition process, and that is that moment that they sit in the waiting room, because there they are generally sort of sitting in the waiting room, and all around them are all the other people that are going for that role. Yes. So is there a way, is there a kind of a tool, a method, a tip that, because here I am saying, please visualize that the part is yours, yet all those people are sitting there, and you probably look across at somebody and go, well, he'd be much better. He'd be much better. It's that self-doubt.
Yeah, the other person always looks more successful than yourself.
Interesting comment. Is there a tip?
So what I would say is that we do need to remember there's an effect called emotional contagion. So one of the worst things you can do, say backstage, if it's a stage performance, or you know, where you're gathered around other performers, is you don't want to start picking up on their nervousness. So if others are feeling nervous, you don't want to get infected by that. So that's why your pre-performance routine, which is something I emphasize in the book, is something you want to work out, and just do that every time. Now you'll see athletes, for example, who are waiting trackside for their event, you know, they've got earphones in and they're listening to some music. We don't know what they're listening to, but they've worked out something that works for them. Now, for some people, it does work to say hello and just sort of diffuse the situation and just be, you know, a bit sort of on buddy terms. But for others, it works better to withdraw and maybe walk around and not look at people. That's the sort of thing you need to work out. But essentially, you don't want to pick up on any of the nervousness or even the overconfidence of others that are in the room there with you.
Interesting point. David, I thank you for your time. I've been talking to Dr. David Roland, who is the author of The Confident Performer. We will have details on our site as to sort of where you can pick up copies. But thank you, David. Is there any, and I guess just to sort of finish, is there anything that sort of is unique to an actor? Because you've spoken about sort of musicians and sort of, you know, other performers, dancers. Is there anything that's unique to an actor, especially seeing they use the voice and the body, not just like a singer who uses voice only?
Well, I think one of the things that actors have got that is an advantage is that they are playing a character. So that means that in a way, in a psychological way, you can separate yourself from this character that's doing the performance.
Interesting.
So a musician is generally themselves when they're performing. But if you've got a character and you've got a whole story around that character, you can let go of the I. We want to let go of the I as performing, and rather the we, or the character and the other ensemble is performing. So if I can feel like I'm the character, I want to take the I out of that. If it's the character that's performing, that reduces that sense of threat and liberates us from any of those constraints or threats we've got about, you know, people evaluating how I am going.
Interesting comment. What a great way to finish. David, thank you. Thank you for your time. And you're in the middle of writing a new book, as we've discussed. And so I look forward to that one at that time. Thank you.
Thanks for chat, Greg.
Bye.